I have a boring and uninspiring space that sits around my new workbench that I put a lot of time in, and I feel I'm not the only one that has a space like this. Let's change that. For this project, I'm going to burn some wood using the Japanese method of Yakisugi, or Shou Sugi Ban we call it in the States. I'm going to build some unnecessary shrines to my hand tools, and choose questionable stain colors, all so I can flex my underdeveloped skill in creativity and design. Let's see how I can develop those skills with a new project. First part of this process is I'm going to burn the wood. Now this is using the Japanese method called Yakisugi, or in the States we call it Shou Sugi Ban. But when you translate those words in English, they mean burn cedar or burn cypress. And I chose white pine here just because it's cheaper. And I went to the local lumber mill that I have close by. I got 4/4 inch stock here, and I milled it down to about 3/8 of an inch. Now, ideally I probably would want about a half an inch, but that's just the way it came out. And I stack this into 4 to 5 planks at a time, so when I go and burn it, it's more manageable to do the full process. Now this is a weed burner here that you can go to your local home center, Home Depot or Lowe's or Menards, whatever, and you can hook it up to a propane tank and burn the wood in a fairly controlled manner here. Now, I will say there is a preference of how deep you want that burn to go. For me, I'm going to go with a very deep, dark, almost alligator-like kind of skin to it and take that pass as needed until that crackle comes to the plank. And then I take the hose and water it down. Now, the reason why I bring water to the piece of material is that when you burn the wood, you're actually extracting an immense amount of moisture from one side. Now I'm choosing not to burn the other side just to not weaken the entire piece of material as I adhere to the wall. But the water allows moisture to come back into the piece and lay flat, as you can see here. And then the process I'm going through here is actually brushing off the soot from that process to get it to a final color and look so I can do my final stain. You can see it actually burn all the way through, so you're good and safe to burn for a pretty good amount of time to get the dark look that you want. But next you'll want to take a shop vac to your piece of material to brush off or suck in kind of any remaining pieces. No harm, no foul here to the board as you go through this process. You're not going to knock off that kind of alligator skin look, but it's essential so when you go through your next component of the process that you can easily take finish to it, and so it locks in that look and eliminates the kind of black soot fingers you'll get all over your hand. So right here I'm using Danish oil natural color. I actually ended up running out and all they had was dark walnut, but in the end it actually looked the exact same. So choose what other color you want. More or less the principle here is that it allows you to lock in that look and seal it so you don't get soot as you brush by it. And you can see kind of that finished look there, nice golden brown transitions with the deep dark burn. And just to prove, boom, no soot. Here's an interesting little nugget or tidbit. The very first thing that I built in my garage was storage clamps. I got tired of having my clamps everywhere, and these were purely, as you can see, functional looking. And it's great, that's kind of a good thing to do for your very first few projects so you can clean things up. I mean, if you look to the left of the room, you can see all my garden tools, lawn mowing tools. Maybe that's a future project there, but so let's get the distance of what we need to do for furring boards here. I got a hammer drill with a concrete or masonry bit, so I can put my tap cons in, tighten it up, because you're going to go to town. And this doesn't need to be like scientific, but more or less I use stop blocks because I want the first furring board just to be off the ground a little bit. So since my boards were 3/8 inch thick, I felt there may be a little bit of flex, and I needed to have enough support that was moderately close to each other without screwing in a million boards. Right here I ended up going about, I think, 2.5, maybe 3 feet, and I used referential boards to get that flush, And it looks like I am level from that first cut. But we're flush, we can screw these in and do the top piece as well. And to repeat on the other side, I'm doing the same process across the board. After I got back and kind of looked at it, looked at the boards that I had for my first batch, which by the way, these are the ones that don't have stain on yet. You know, pro tip, stain them first, then put them up. It is a very messy process cleaning in the garage. What I'm doing here is that I'm putting these pieces out in the way that I think they may look good based off their characteristics and shifting them around and aligning them to get ready to staple in. Well, not staple, brad nail. And first thing I do here is get that one nailed in perfectly and flush or plumb, whatever the correct word is. And then I go to town on the brad nails. Now at first I thought I was going to screw all these in, but as I use the brad nail as a temporary gauge, oh, guest star.
Whoa!
Well, not everybody likes your art, but we'll see what the end product is and how she reacts. Alright, time to go back to nailing, getting these all dialed in. And now I go to the other side. And as you can see, I did a little bit extra work off camera, and I painted the background of that. Now, whenever you do a tool wall, is you got to get all your tools out, and I'm choosing just to focus on my hand tools for this first part of the project. Now, the way I'm thinking about this is that I like to group the tools based off their functionality. So I'm looking at all my measuring instruments here. I got my straight edges or rulers. I got my digital caliper, I got my protractor, I got my marking gauge when I get real fancy with cutting with hand tools, and I'm using some leftover white oak scrap here, and I'm marking what that looks like once I drop it in and cut out dados. Now I'll go over to the table saw and miter out that distance based off those markings, and this is just a real good clean way of getting it cut to the exact dimensions. That's perpendicular and using reference guides as a simple approach. For my measuring holders, one in particular is my marking gauge, and it's a cylinder shape, so I need to get it in the same structure that can drop that in, so I can't use the miter approach on the table saw here. But I want to drill that all the way through and just be sure that you have a block on the other side of it so you don't blow out the material. And there we go. Next we'll go over to the workbench, and I am using a 150 grit sanding block here just to knock off the edges. So when you put in your tools and whatnot, you know, if your hand nicks it or whatever, it's just less painful. And to further clean these up, I'm just knocking down a little bit of the table saw marks that weren't flush with a bench chisel here. Now that piece is dialed in, I'm going to go over to my chisel holder and do a very similar process of hogging out the material that goes all the way to the bottom. I got my stop piece there so I don't get blowout. Now I'll bring it back to my workbench and mark out what those dimensions are so I can safely get my material. Now, hindsight here, I actually marked them a little too narrow because the mouth or the base of the chisels have a tapered angle on there, so just test fit your pieces after you get one in, so just make sure when you cut out the rest that they are easily accessible to pull in and out. Continue with the same knockdown approach. I'm going to use my chisel here to create a chamfer on the edge of these, just so as I put my chisels in, I don't have a sharp edge, because pulling these in and out constantly, you're going to be dinging up the your tools and also your hands. So I thought it would be fitting to take the same approach here and knock down that in a very nice angled manner, so it's nice to the touch. I didn't used to own a caliper set or digital caliper, and I found this very fitting, pun intended, to get the exact dimensions of what the tools I'll be hanging in there, and transfer that over to my material here, so I can cut it pretty accurately to the edges there. And like all the other little holes, you need to have a way to insert your materials, so I took another pass at cutting these out. And the last thing I want to do is just ensure that I have a good smooth edge on all the sides. So I'm taking my smoothing plane here and getting this nice level and flat so it can adhere to the wall when I screw it in. Now this next phase is I'm building the ultimate shrine, a hand plane till to store all my hand planes. And I'm going to break down some rough 4/4 white oak again. And the structure of this more or less is just like a carcass. You know, you got your sides, your bottom, your top. Depending on if you want to have it see-through or not, you can put it back. But for me, I am choosing just to go with 2 sides here. As you can see, I'm cutting them down. Now I'm going to cut the bottom shelf, the top shelf, and then just watch the dust explode because the hose fell off. Then finally cut the supports that will hold the actual material for the hand planes to rest on. Now we're going to go over to the table saw, and much like all the other material that we hog out from a miter perspective is the dados or rabbets. This is the inset that I do on the top and bottom. So the bottom bracer and the top bracer can sit in, and I have something to glue and have a little bit more reference for a structural integrity component to it. Now once I get that in, I actually match that up to the stock material that I have milled to make sure it fits flush. And then I come back and I am actually doing the dado for the top shelf, and I'm using the piece of material that will be referenced in that to fit into it, and that way I can have it pulled off of the edge and slowly move the cut in on the miter and dial it in so that it's a snug fit of the exact dimension. So I kind of like using the regular table saw blade and versus a dado for these kind of 1 to 2 cuts. Now if I was doing like a production run on a lot of dados, I would probably use the dado set. Now here I am getting the boards lined up perfectly based off of the angled cut that I'm going to do here. And I'm going to put my tapering jig right on that line to ensure that when this sits flipped over onto the table saw, it'll run right down that line because that table or that tapering jig was cut flush to the table saw. Now there's probably better ways of doing this. I have a track saw, there's plenty of other methods, but just wanted to test this because I built this a few videos ago and it actually worked quite well. And I'm going to raise the blade up here to get it to the exact height. Run that through nice and smooth. And one thing I like about this tapering jig is it has a lot of downward pressure to hold material like this as you go through an angle. So it's just an extra safety feature that was fairly cheap, fairly simple, and you can see these cuts are nice and perfect and no burn marks. Now that we have it all cut, this is the dry fitting, and I've gone through and glued and screwed these areas in as a little bit extra flair or creativity to this piece. I'm actually taking brass screws to further strengthen this till. And now we're going to go through and, very similar to our other holders, I want to chamfer the edges to ensure that we have a nice soft end. So if I bump on it, because it is on the wall, you know, it won't hurt or it won't damage any tools. So I'm just taking a block plane here, knocking down the edges, get into a nice kind of little tiny little 45 or chamfer. Just taking a nice few passes off. And on the internal pieces, now in hindsight, you probably would have taken a few passes on this, but I'm using a bench chisel here to kind of knock down the parts where my plane can't get. And where I glued this, the angles started to actually slope, and my shelf wasn't quite flush to that, so I took a bench plane here and just knock down the edges until it sits flush with the top shelf and the top of the till. And you can see you get a little blurry there, but I got it nice and flush. Now it's time to build the internal supports that's going to hold the 1/2-inch plywood that will sit at an angle, which by the way, it's 10 degrees. And I'm cutting these supports at a bevel on both top and bottom so that they can sit flush to the roof and also that top shelf. And I'm doing about 1.5 inches, I believe it's like 1.5 inches distance here to get those screwed in. And I do a little pre-drilling here. And oh, what's this? Please subscribe. Yep, I have a small channel here, so every like, thumbs up, subscribe helps, so much appreciated. And now I'm going to take that and glue and screw these supports in so that they can have a sturdy amount of weight that's sitting onto it. Now I'm just double, triple checking that I got these dialed in before the glue settles and sink in those final screws. And what you do to one side, you do to the other. Get that nice and snug. Now it's starting to look like a nice piece of furniture. What's funny about this project is that I swore I would not do French cleats, but I did think this was suitable if I put it as a design feature that is hidden, and I can move this as needed as I change my structure of my tool wall because things evolve and grow. But what I'm doing here is that I'm sitting it flush to the back of this till so it can sit flush up against the wall of my tool organization. Pull it in, double check, wipe every piece of furniture because that's what I do. And then next here I actually am taking a sanding block to dial these in. So very much like the internal supports where you bevel each edge, you're going to do that same thing here. And I'm using a sanding block to just dial it in to get it perfectly flush and to sit in. Doesn't that look just perfect? Yeah. Okay, so now I'm going to get all my hand tools or my bench planes and I'm going to tape the sides of these. And the reason why I do that is to create a little bit of barrier between the walls that I'm building up there. So when I do take these off, that it'll still fit snug, but not so tight that I have to force it in. So when I take the tape off, it should just plop right in there, nice and smooth. Perfect. And I'm going to use a square here just to ensure that I have both sides taped perfectly. And I'm doing a dry fit and marking it. Then putting a little, very little dab of glue on here. This is not some intense piece of material that needs a lot of support. So I just need a little bit versus having tons of squeeze out. And then I take my hand plane here, drop it back in there just to make sure that it is snug. And to be extra cautious, because these are tiny little sticks, they tend to bow after you mill them. And I'm going to get them dialed in so they're straight, not only 90 degrees to the top, but in the midsection they are parallel to the adjacent wall. And it looks like that is nice and perfect. Now let's put some tape on there to put a little bit of pressure just as that glue sets, and then I put in the next set of benches in there and it doesn't move. Just one more check. And it looks like we are on our way to the next set. And quadruple check. This next part, I thought I would go something unique, and I saw this pistachio green. And if you ever do any stain, I feel like most people, when you do like white oak, you go pretty pure because it's just a really good look. But why not mess that all up and do some baby food green here? So we'll see how this pans out. Let me know down in the comments if I made the worst decision or the best decision. Let me know. And so far, it's like a very pale version of the Incredible Hulk. That's what I'm going for here. And not bad so far. Now we are at the end of the home stretch here. The payoff, the joy of, I believe, probably like a week's worth of work. And it may look good, may not. We'll find out. But the process I'm doing here is, what's my centerpiece I feel like this white oak picture surrounded by a white oak picture frame, you know, how meta is that, is my anchoring point. And then from there, I am taking about a 6 to 7 inch spacing across the board there and marking it and getting it all flush. So when you step back and look at it and say, wow, that was really not crooked. That's good. And I'm putting these on here and it's starting to come together. I feel pretty good. The puke green or the pale Incredible Hulk look is not too bad. And my thought process was that, you know, these trees started out with nice green leafy characteristics that had life in them, and now that they're chopped and milled and structured in a certain way, it's like I should make a, you know, ode back to their original state. And maybe it looks good, maybe it doesn't, I don't know, but now it's time to power through and put all my other little trinkets up that I think are essential in my building process and take a step back and look at it. And I think it looks pretty good. I don't know. Let me know. All right, feel free to leave a comment down below. And if you haven't already, hit like and subscribe because that helps out my small little channel. Well, that's a wrap. What do you think?